Hello and welcome. In this video, we'll be discussing the various causes and consequences of the major political and social revolutions of the period from 1750 to 1900. The first thing that we need to know is that discontent with monarchies and imperial rule encouraged the development of systems of government and various ideologies, including democracy and 19th century liberalism. Let's focus in on that first part. Where is this discontent with monarchies and imperial rule even coming from? Well, a lot of it is coming from the Enlightenment and its predecessors, the Protestant Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, and the European exposure to the Americas. All of this questioning of traditional ways of thinking and living made it only natural to then question the role of government and the nature of empire. This is what we talk about when we're talking about contextualizing a historical development, is zooming out and looking at what's contributing to it. So this discontent encouraged the development of systems of government like democracy and 19th century liberalism. We'll see these interests reflected in the creation of the American and French republics and reforms within Great Britain and Europe in general in the first half of the 19th century. But we'll talk more about those in a later episode. However, before we move on, I want to establish that 19th century liberalism is not the same thing as 20th century liberalism. 19th century liberalism, while it encouraged increased representation and access to government decisions, was much more interested in liberty in the sense of freedom from government intervention in people's lives and in the economy than the contemporary definition. It was anti-monarchism, especially absolute monarchy and mercantilism in nature. As part of this increased discontent with monarchies and imperial rule, the second thing we need to know is, like it says here, that colonial subjects in the Americas led a series of rebellions inspired by democratic ideals, and that those series of rebellions occurred in North America, in Haiti, and Latin America. Let's focus in on each of these in turn. There are two main factors that I want to discuss in terms of driving the North American colonists' revolt against the British. The first is the influence of Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke, and the second is the influence of anti-mercantilist, proto-capitalist thinkers like Adam Smith. It's important to note that the American colonists saw themselves as British citizens who expected their rights as guaranteed by the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and the Declaration of Rights, among them free speech, free assembly, and representation by a real and functioning parliament. The colonists didn't send representatives to parliament, but they were actually okay with this because they weren't really bothered by the British government. They had traditions of self-government like the colonial assemblies. You may have heard or remember about the Virginia House of Burgesses, where many of the leaders of the Revolution will get experience. Following the 7 Years' War, however, Britain ends its policy of salutary or beneficial neglect of the colonies and becomes much more absolutist by restricting both political and economic freedoms. This is where those acts that you learn about in American history come in, like the Sugar Act, the Townshend Act, the Tea Act, the Stamp Act, etc. Inspired by the works of John Locke, who established the theories of natural rights to life, liberty, and property, the colonists first seek representation to go along with their taxation. But when that's ignored, they declare themselves independent, citing Locke's contract of the government existing to serve the needs of the people, and the people's responsibility to check and or overthrow that government if it actually stops serving that purpose. The new nation state established by the American Revolution is revolutionary in the sense that its founders took Enlightenment ideas about the nature of government and the role of the people in that government and put them into action, often by trial and error and, of course, evolution over the past 247 or so years. However, scholars continue to argue that rather than a revolution, it's really more of a war for independence. Revolutions connote and imply that the power structure of a place is reversed, and that's just not the case with the American Revolution. Those who are at the top of the socio-political structure before the revolution stay in power afterwards. They are wealthy white men with large landholdings. The idea that, quote, all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness continued to be aspirational for years to come. So now that we've talked about the American Revolution, let's go ahead and move on to the other revolutions of the Western Hemisphere, starting perhaps with the most impactful and revolutionary movement of the period, which was the Haitian Revolution. The French Caribbean colony of Saint-Domingue, which would become Haiti, was like other colonies in the Americas, a place where the sugar plantation-based agricultural complex had given rise to a society of extreme inequality, where a small white planter class dominated a large population of enslaved Africans and mixed-race people. In the second half of the 18th century, freed Blacks and mixed-race people had begun agitating for increased rights and opportunities against the backdrop of increasing tension between the enslaved people and the planter class. Increased violent and nonviolent slave revolts eventually coalesced into a movement across the colony following in the wake of the French Revolution. Let's have a look at one of the first documents associated with the Revolution. Go ahead and pause here, considering what influences from the Enlightenment you can see. Because the Haitian Revolution occurred during the French Revolution and amidst the repressive and cruel world of sugar plantations, the revolution itself is drawn out over 13 years and is quite bloody, with an estimated 75,000 white French colonists being killed and 350,000 enslaved people dying across the island. While Toussaint Louverture eventually led his forces to defeat the repeated French, British, and Spanish attempts to recapture Haiti and re-enslave the people, the eventual success of the revolution had ripple effects throughout the Caribbean and Western world. An inspiration to enslaved people everywhere, the new United States was particularly wary of the impact that a free Haiti would have on its own enslaved population. Images of the Haitian Revolution often dramatized and exaggerated the idea of violent and dangerous Black people to white people, especially white women. The conversation around slavery in the Western world changed. It sped up in places like Britain, where the slave trade was abolished in 1807 and slavery itself abolished in British territories in the 1830s. But it slowed the conversation down in the United States. The Haitian Revolution stands as the only truly successful slave revolt in history, and it established the first Black-run state in the Western Hemisphere, making it widely accepted as deeply revolutionary. The people who were on the bottom of the social ladder overthrew those at the top and replaced them. Conversations about liberty, both economic and political, continued into the Latin American revolutions, where war in Europe threw Spain into tumult and provided an opportunity for Latin American colonists to demand their independence as well. In the Latin American colonies, we know that the political and economic dominance of the peninsulares left little room for those below them in the racially driven hierarchy of the casta system. Creoles, people of pure Spanish descent, but born in the Americas, were extremely resentful of their second-class political and economic status. Beyond this, there was also little self-government and a lot of division. As the Creoles became more intent on achieving their rights, they find a leader in a Venezuelan named Simón Bolívar. Bolívar's role in Latin American independence can be compared actually to that of Washington in the North American. Both were wealthy and well-connected men who used their military leadership and political philosophies to lead their diverse followers towards independence. Bolívar has a bit more complicated of a task on his hands, though, because he has such a wide variety in geography, in cultures, and in race to contend with. His big speaking point then becomes this idea of becoming Americanos. He argues that while they have many differences across the many different colonies, they, unlike the peninsulares, are unique and joined by the fact that they are American, new upon this earth. As you can see in this map, it takes a long time for the different colonies to each get their independence, and it's a long, bloody, and divisive battle. Politically, the new Latin American colonies are unable to unite and lack well-prepared leadership and struggle to overcome the racism and discrimination inherent in the colonial and plantation-based society that Spain had created. This is only exacerbated by the fact that Bolívar dies rather young without delivering on any promise other than independence. The key point we need to know, though, for these three revolutions is that, quote, as you can see here, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and the Latin American independence movements facilitated the emergence of independent states in the Americas. Not for the first and definitely not for the last time, we can see the echoes of the Enlightenment run through these revolutions, with people across the colonial Americas demanding independence and increased rights and representation. The other part of this that's so deeply influenced by the Enlightenment is that each of these revolutions imprinted themselves in print. And the final thing that we need to know about this topic is that the ideas of Enlightenment philosophers, as reflected in revolutionary documents, influenced resistance to existing political authority, often in pursuit of independence and/or democratic ideals. We'll start with the Revolutionary Declaration of Independence, which reeks of John Locke's two treatises on government. But Jefferson, when he writes it, does switch out his words, pursuit of happiness, where Locke had property, in the very familiar phrase at the end of the first stanza. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This document is in fact so revolutionary that during the French Revolution, the Marquis de Lafayette, a close friend of Jefferson's, pens the foundational Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen for the French people, starting out that, quote, all men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Next up, we have the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments, which demands increased rights for women in the United States. This document copies the Declaration of Independence as well, adding in women wherever Jefferson has men. Olympe de Gouges, a French feminist, will also copy this model with the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen. Going forward almost 200 years, just so you can kind of get the idea of how impactful these documents are, the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence from France will use the same phrasing and the same structure as well, and it's from 1945. While the demand for natural rights and political representation against an unjust ruler suffused these documents, Bolivar's letter from Jamaica, the document most closely associated with the Latin American revolutions, mostly makes an economic case against Spain's mercantilist policies in the colonies. His major gripe is with the fact that Creoles have no real opportunities economically, and that Spain has purposely prevented them from developing economically, treating them as slaves. While that may be a bit of an exaggeration, you'll see the same reference made in Patrick Henry's famous Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech, for example. It demonstrates that the subordinate nature of the colonial relationship between Spain and its colonies is no longer sustainable for those in the colonies, and they believe independence is the only option left to them. We didn't actually discuss the French Revolution today, even though we talked about Lafayette and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, but we will in another video. Overall, what's important, remember that your big takeaways should be about the causes and consequences of these colonial revolutions, considering what influenced them and what they in turn influenced. Thanks for watching.